Beth Kelley, welcome to the Evolve and Play podcast.
Thank you.
You've been on my list of people to interview for a very long time.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, for those who don't know, we share the same last name because we're married. But what people don't know about you is that in addition to being married to me, you also have an extensive background in thinking about and researching play. And some of the work that you did early on in your academic career actually became very fundamental to the work that I created with Evolve and Play. So let's just start with, what does play mean to you? Why are you so excited about it?
Oh, that's a good question. One thing that I find so fascinating about play is just how diverse it is, how hard it is to define. In preparation for this interview, I actually went back and revisited my master's thesis, which I did in 2009 to 2011. So it's pretty old at this point. But there's still a lot of good information in there, and it was really hard to actually define play. But the idea was that it is something that is, beneficial to the person who is doing it, or the animal that is doing play. But it's not necessarily like a life. It's not necessary to live for them in the immediate need. And so that was a really fascinating thing for me of like, well, why are we driven to play? And at all ages, and so many different animals are driven to play. So not just humans, but even, alligators and, birds and of so many different species of animals are driven to play. And so that was something that was really fascinating to me. And as I dug into it more, finding how it may not be necessary for immediate survival, but it is so important as like a secondary tool for survival. It helps humans learn skills that will be necessary as they get older, and other animals too. We see that with, wolf puppies. They will play chase and tag and stuff, and that becomes really useful for them as they become adult wolves and go out and hunt and things like that. We see cats playing pouncing games, and so humans play chasing games and throwing games and things like that, and those become so beneficial to us later in life as we become adults and need to go chase things and hunt things down, or at least we used to need to do that. And so I found it so amazing to study all the different ways that humans are drawn to play, are driven to play. If we have any free time, humans especially will just play. And that's so that was just a really fascinating question for me of like, why are we so driven to it? What are those benefits? And especially, why do we keep playing as adults? And I think that's something that is a more unique to humans than other animals, that we continue to play for the longest amount of time compared to even like gorillas or chimpanzees or other primates.
Yeah. So you became interested in play in part because you were living with me, and I was one of the earliest adopters of parkour, and you were trying to kind of academically understand what all these grown-ups were doing.
That's right.
Jumping around on things.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, my master's thesis was actually focused on parkour, and exactly to your point, as it started to spread internationally and it became this really big thing, there were so many different, theories coming out about like, oh, it's, anarcho-environmentalism or something like that. And just as an observer, it was obvious to me that like, no, this is play. These people are driven to play. If you ask them, why are you doing this? Every traceur or traceuse that I interviewed said, it's fun, it's engaging, it makes me happy. And so if anything, my master's thesis was sort of a advocacy piece for play, of why we needed play as adults and why this was important and why it shouldn't be ostracized or sort of gotten rid of, like a lot of, you see signs for like, don't skateboard here, don't parkour here. No ball games. I didn't want that to happen to parkour.
So did you have a academic interest in play before encountering parkour, or is that new for you?
No, it was actually new for me. I had originally gone in thinking, looking at it as a transfer of information. So my background, even with anthropology, was I was a journalist. And so I was fascinated with communication. And so what originally got me interested in parkour and studying it was understanding how it was getting transmitted. It had started in, the tiny, suburbs of Paris, in Nice, and then to see it transfer to London and then to the United States, primarily through the internet and sharing videos and things like that, and online forums and people communicating and coordinating meetups and things like that. That was what originally got my attention, of just this grassroots effort of sharing information and creating community that way. Was also a really fascinating part of the parkour culture when it first started.
Yeah. So you were practicing parkour for some period of that time. You were kind of in and out as a practitioner. And then you were obviously observing me and my friends and, the whole community that was developing, right? Like we always joke that kind of the org that we built was born at your kitchen table.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But I'm curious to kind of think about, the deep roots of your own kind of orientation towards play, because I've gone on and taken a lot of the research that you did, and I'll talk about the monkeys and the macaques, and and I've layered that into what I've done, and you've for a period of time we weren't so much working together on any of those things, but while you're working in the corporate world, working at Deloitte Digital, you're making dioramas of Spider-Man in the office.
Oh,
right?
Yes, yeah.
So you've had a really deep personal relationship towards the necessity for creative play.
Yeah.
That's really a part of you that goes back to way before you ever encountered parkour or me. So I'm curious to hear about what play has meant for you in your life.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, I think that's an important question to bring up, because you're right. I think a lot of the time people think of play specifically as physical play, of throwing a ball, jumping off of a thing, and one of my preferred methods of play is building things. So I remember, like, some of my earliest memories are building sandcastles at the beach. Like, you literally could just leave me at the beach for like an hour and I would be building a sandcastle and I would be perfectly happy. And that is true even now when we take our kids to the beach. Like, I'm happy to build a fort with driftwood and things like that too. And so for me, I think that is an important thing that kind of gets lost too. Of play can take on so many different forms, and so for me, play is also theatrical. I have a background in theater, and so performing and creating little characters and things like that too is also a form of play that is really important to me and really drives my, is what really gets me excited and is part of my play drive. And so I think being able to explore that even into adulthood is really important. And I feel like if I don't get a chance to do that, there's a big gap in my, I'm not as happy, I'm not as engaged, I'm not as motivated. So that your story about Deloitte Digital is a good one. We had just moved into a new office space and it was still under construction and it was kind of dingy and there were literally holes in the cement and things like that. And I just got so fed up with that, I decided that I wanted to put little Playmobil construction workers in those different holes. And of course, I went to Goodwill and I couldn't find enough construction workers, so I just kind of grabbed whatever little Playmobil people I could find and just created little vignettes and little dioramas and stuff all over the building. And I actually thought I was going to get in trouble for doing that, but everybody loved it so much it stayed there for at least until I left a year or two later.
And you've played with things like toy bombing and
Yeah.
ways as well.
Yeah.
So when I talk about play, or what kind of we primarily focus on within evolved move play, is it's evolved, right? We evolved for movement, and we evolved to learn movement, predominantly through play. So the kind of the sort of hierarchy of how we're thinking about things is human beings are suffering because of a mismatch between the environments, the behavioral environments that we live in, and the nature that we have from our evolution. And a huge part of that is we just don't move enough. We don't walk, we don't run, we don't climb, we don't lift, we don't carry, we don't engage in rough and tumble play. And that's a real source of suffering for people that people don't realize. And we're trying to replace it with exercise, and it's not working. So, okay, we evolved to move, and then, we could take people out and we could make them run, we could make them jump, we could do all those things. But is it actually motivating? Is it actually exciting to them? And the theory that I started this whole thing with, which was in part, from my experience with parkour, in part from conversations with you about that, and we got the chance to work with Frank Ferencich back in those days. But the theory was that play is really the best way that we can understand what a human being needs as far as movement, and it's the best way to get people to inherently want to move, to just remind them of their play drives.
Yes.
So that was a long preamble to say, though, that I tend to talk about play from a motor or movement perspective, and that there are, say, 3 fundamental ways that we engage in movement play: locomotor and exploratory play, object-oriented play, like you talked about building forts on the beach, and rough and tumble play. But you're, in some ways, most interested in narrative play, which is something that we don't really talk about so much, so it's become a bigger and bigger part of our retreats.
Yeah.
Narrative play, you come from a theater background, obviously. You did lots of plays as a kid.
Yes.
And then creative play, right? So I can swing a stick around, like I've been doing all the rope flow stuff recently.
Yeah.
And that's not especially creative. Maybe it's creative in a flowing, self-expressive way, but there's not an end product at the end.
Sure.
Whereas you like to do projects that have a piece of art at the end of it.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious to hear your reflection on how you see the relationship between those types of play and your own personal play personality. And then, we've talked about the idea that your play personality tells you something about who you are and what are the things that are going to make you happy in the world.
Yeah. So with the first question, I think they may seem very different, but I see them as actually quite related, where you're still creating something in that, where you're creating a pattern, you're trying something new. I think of dance is sort of this combination of creative play. You're trying to create a specific movement type, but then also physical play, where you're trying to explore the space around you and stretch and really move your body in a unique and creative way. So I think they are connected. I think there's a lot of ways that the different play types intersect. And I think, to your point, it's really important to find the kind of play that motivates you personally, because that is going to be the thing that's going to get you up and out and moving, and changes it from exercise being a tedious, boring thing to something that's exciting. So I think there's actually quite a lot in there. So with like you were talking about the rope flow, I think there's a lot of people who played jump rope as a kid, and that could be something that they could tie back into.
Yeah.
Even you talked about narrative play as well. For me, there is absolutely a combination with dance is often telling a story. So there's narrative play in dance and movement and things like that. I've noticed in your own retreats too, you will invite people to go and explore the space, whatever that space is, whether it's the woods or the beach or that sort of thing. And oftentimes little stories will kind of pop out of it, where somebody will pretend to be a dragon, or somebody will pretend to sword fight. And so it's a combination of narrative play, object play, and physical movement play. And I think that's so beautiful to see that come out naturally for people, because I do think as adults we get stuck in this, I have to do it this certain way. And play gives us that opportunity to break out of that mindset and say, I don't have to do 50 push-ups. I could imagine I'm hiding from a dragon and I have to pop up and look for the dragon every single time, or however you want to do that, but some extra element to make it fun for yourself.
It's interesting, as we're talking about that idea of the intersection between, I was just thinking about how we'll talk about building a line in parkour.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You build this piece goes to this
Yeah.
piece, and you end up, even though it's ephemeral, you can't point at it once it's done. It's constructed in a way. You've linked things together in a
Yeah.
in a specific way.
Yeah.
But this the narrative piece I think is interesting because as a child, I was very, very driven by narrative play. I spent, thousands of hours in the woods pretending to be a elf ranger fighting orcs,
Yeah.
right? Or some variation on that. And there was a point at which that kind of play just didn't have the same purchase on my mind anymore. And I kind of lost play in a way, right? Like I was still playing basketball and that was really good, and I was doing martial arts, and that would be really, really take me into those play states, and I was doing gymnastics. And then that eventually, becomes parkour when I discovered parkour. But like early on in parkour, I started to experiment with the idea of like, if it's about sort of being like the creatures we evolved for, like I could imagine a scenario where I'm a hunter forager, I'm hiding behind something, I'm running out and throwing a spear, and I'm connecting the skills, the movement skills, to some kind of narrative. But it didn't stick for me. It wasn't sticky. And there's a kind of silly, whimsical narrative thing that children just automatically do that I found for me the motor aspects of play were easier to fully go into as an adult when I let go of that element or didn't try to add it.
Ah, that's interesting. Whereas for me, I find it's almost the opposite. I need that narrative or that I don't want to say the rules to change in a sense where it's not about you have to do a perfect push-up. It's you need to get down because we're playing Watchtower, for example, and the person who's the watcher is counting down, and it doesn't matter how your quadrupedal movement looks as long as you can hide behind the tree in time to not be spotted, right? So for me, that is way more engaging and way more fun than I want to get the perfect shape. So it's interesting how it changes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Watchtower thing, for me, that's slightly different because I would think of that as like a constraint, right? It's a structure, right? So one way that I've had a lot of fun with pull-ups is using push-ups is using the practice ball. So so we have a ball on a string, and we swing the ball at your head, and when the ball comes at your head, you have to dip underneath it.
Yeah.
And then we can swing the ball at your hands, and you have to pop your hands off the ground and catch the ground again. And so that's a variation that creates, a real sort of pressure, and it is sort of imaginal in a way because you don't actually have to get away from the ball. It's not going to hurt you, but it
maybe.
But it's not quite the same as like someone saying, "Now the dragon's there." Like there's something that's hard as an adult about someone being like, I don't know, maybe I'm reaching too far back into the history of the internet, but lightning bolt, you know?
Yeah.
That kind of imaginal play, it can work. It can be really powerful for people.
Yeah, I would say the ball constraint would actually stress me out a lot more. It would make it less fun.
Interesting.
Whereas I think when we have played the Robin game,
so that's really like that's a deeply imaginal game.
Very much.
It's called Nest Robbers.
Nest Robbers. Yeah.
Nest Robbers is a game that Kyle Kalk, one of our teachers, brings from the Wilderness Awareness School tradition, and in that game you're playing out the role of being a dark-eyed junco.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which is a nest or a ground nesting bird, and you have to find food and protect your eggs, and you have Steller's jays and weasels that are trying to eat your eggs, and you have Cooper's hawks that are trying to eat you. So you have all these little roles being played in the drama.
Yeah.
And it has a remarkable impact on people's ability to recognize the real world, the perspectival world of the birds.
Right.
And you see the birds better afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. The salience landscape is a lot richer for people. And I remember when I've played that game, certainly the first time I played that game, I got way into it, like way, way, way into it. And that was fun and also really surprising that, yeah, at 39, 40 years old, however old I was, that I could still really get into that imaginal space. And I bolted when I heard, that my nest was being robbed or that sort of thing. So, yeah.
I can totally imagine you being super upset about your nest.
Oh, yeah, I was. I was like, no.
Don't mess with my babies.
Don't mess with my babies. My little bean babies.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that that's a great example of finding movement practices that work for you and being kind to yourself in that way of saying, okay, maybe I'm not going to be as motivated by the ball, whereas, for you it's like, no, that's exactly what I need. I need that like little bit of danger to really make it alive for me.
Yeah, I mean, sort of martial arts.
Yeah.
Warrior arts is a good frame for me.
Yeah.
But theatricality is good, is really a big thing for you.
Yeah, it is. Oh, and I wanted to say too about with you were talking about the parkour lines before. I wonder, I suppose I have a wondering of the practice of video recording those lines. Some of it is, you want to show off or you want to, but I think a lot of it is actually you want to have a permanent record of, I did this thing, look at this line that I created. So it does go back almost to a piece of art.
Yeah.
Of, I did this beautiful diving Kong or whatever. So I do think there is some overlap there again in creating a piece of art. And I mean, in some of the way, and the videos, some that are being made now are beautiful. Often they are pieces of art.
Yeah, as a parkour athlete, if you have the ability to edit well, or you have the ability to really, if you know how to work really well with an editor, then there is an art form of the production of an Instagram clip or a YouTube clip that's distinct from the movements themselves in the moment. Knowing how to frame them, how to set them up, what's gonna capture what's happening in that moment in a way that, ideally moves somebody and invites out, their own potential for play or excitement.
Yeah.
So, so you were involved in theater throughout your life.
Yep.
Until what, 21?
Yeah, until I was about 21.
21. And then when you were talking about how you like to build forts.
Yes.
I was thinking back to when we lived in Seattle and we were going down to the beach at Carkeek. And at the time, I think, we were kind of stressed in our marriage with each other. It wasn't the best time, and I could see that you were struggling yourself in, being able to have fun and access your own capacity to move. And
well, we had small children then too, and that's hard to balance taking care of them and taking care of yourself, and
and I remember we went down to Carkeek, and I was trying to encourage everyone to do some movement practice, and we're going to go down there, and for me that means like, let's run down the driftwood logs, let's pick things up and swing them and throw them, let's roughhouse in the sand. And you just started to build your fort.
Yeah.
Someone had built a fort.
It started to, yeah.
They built a fort, and you got there and you started to add to it. And there was just this moment of recognition of like, I was kind of disappointed that you didn't want to do parkour with me. But at the same time, I was like, she's doing her thing now. And I was able to kind of just step outside and help direct the children so they could participate but not overwhelm you too much. And it was a real interesting moment for me of recognizing like, hey, you need your play.
Mm-hmm.
You really need your play.
I do, yeah.
But it doesn't look exactly like the way that I play.
Yeah.
And I want to play with you, but at the same time, like, it's like there's an empathy gap.
Yeah.
Between the way that we play, and so it was it's been a challenge at times to figure out how do we make play work for you.
Yeah. How do we play together? How do we even potentially do parallel play? That's actually a developmental thing that children go through. If they'll play by themselves and then they'll play their own game, but next to somebody. And I do feel like we've kind of had to go through that development ourselves as a couple, and just working together of, even if we're in the same space, we aren't going to be able to do the same obstacles. And so you're right, at the very beginning of your parkour practice, I was coming out with you quite a bit, and I tried to do exactly what you were doing, and I very quickly figured out I am not a 6'2" man with really good upper body strength. I'm not going to be able to do the same stuff that you and your friend Dane and other, and then Tyson showed up, and so all these really strong, capable men primarily were doing things that I did not feel capable doing, and I didn't have the vocabulary of understanding the space, of having the parkour lens, the parkour vision that you guys later talked about. I didn't have that, and so it was hard for me to feel like I could parallel play with you guys at that point. And so I think that has been a big development for me personally that I'm still working on, of giving myself permission in a way to say, okay, I'm not going to do what these guys are doing, and that's okay. I'm going to do my own thing. And then just exploring it and seeing what that looks like. I think, honestly, if anything, you and I have been able to do that really well at the Ninja Gym here in town. I think that's actually really opened up opportunities for us to do physical parallel play, where there are enough obstacles set up, of varying levels of difficulty and things like that, and they're all adjustable. So we can both work on cats or kongs or that sort of thing, and we're able to adjust them to our own levels. And so I think that's, it's been a process for sure for us over the years.
So let's talk about that. It's a fascinating thing. You're 42 years old. You've got 3 kids.
Yep.
Youngest is what, 6.5?
6.5. Yep.
I know. It's my child.
Like what?
And you did a Kong ball the first time, really.
Well, the first time in a while.
First time in a while.
It's a skill that I have done, but never consistently. It's like I'll get it and then I'll lose it, or I'll half get it and then it'll freak me out and I won't do it again. So no, I feel like this is the first time that I've been able to consistently Kong ever, where I can go in and be like, yeah, I can Kong that, and not have it be a like, maybe, I don't know, we'll find out.
So that's a pretty remarkable thing. There's not a lot of women, over 40 who are learning to do a Kong vault, or
or men, potentially.
Or men, for that matter.
People,
and it's been a really fascinating thing to kind of walk through with you, and it's really interesting from a kind of motor learning, the role of emotions in success at anything. And it's been a really fascinating thing to go through. So tell me a little bit about that experience. Like a couple weeks ago, you decided to go to the Ninja Gym. Initially, you were going to go with a friend.
Yeah.
She couldn't come.
Right.
You didn't want me to come when she was going to come.
Right.
And then you decided that you did want me to come when she wasn't going to come.
Yeah, well, I think it helps to have a buddy. I think that's another thing that's really important in play, is having somebody who you can play with and bounce ideas off of is also very motivating.
Yeah.
We were talking before about like what kind of play is motivating, and I think having a person to play with is hugely motivating for anyone. But it can be scary, especially if you think that they're better than you, or they're going to judge you, or that kind of thing. So that can be really scary to invite someone out to play. So that was actually a big trust leap for me to say, okay, I trust that, Rafe's going to come as a play buddy and not as Coach Rafe, or he's going to go do his own thing, or, so that was one big thing that I think made it uh, possible for me to succeed in that space, was that I was like, okay, it's a friendly thing. It's not, there's no specific goals necessarily. We really were just going to play to see what was going to happen, to explore. And I think, being able to go into a gym space like that where it was soft, so if anything happened, I felt safe to land, and I could fail and it wasn't going to hurt physically. And it was, for whatever reason that day, I decided, this is something that is a real mental block for me, to not be able to Kong. It feels like something that, whether or not I should be able to do it, I'm not able to. But I sort of have been able to do it before. So it's one of those things of like, I'm so close. It would be nice to spend some time and just see if I could get it. And but it was very intimidating, and I didn't know how to start. And so I really appreciated how you came in and offered ways to break it down, ways of like, okay, we're just going to start really small and build up from there, because I certainly have this problem, and I think you've expressed that a lot of people have this same problem of, I just want to go 100%. Like when, anytime I start running again, because I'll take time off from running and that sort of thing, and I'll immediately want to go back up to the full 5 miles or 10 miles or whatever, and that's not, that's not realistic. That's not, you're going to break down, you're going to hurt yourself. But I'm a slow learner, and I still want to like, okay, I'll just go and Kong, and it never, I don't want to say never, but it hadn't really occurred to me to like, okay, I got to break this down into smaller steps. And so that was really helpful to have you be there to kind of show me ways of breaking it down into smaller steps, until suddenly I was doing it.
Yeah, there's kind of two directions I'm curious to go about that. One is, part of the thing about a Kong is a thing that you've expressed many, many times, which is you like moving, right? You like being playful. You love running, you love rock climbing, you love swing dance, you love kickboxing. But parkour has been hard for you to adopt, because you feel a lot of anxiety about flying through the air. Anything that involves flying through the air,
Not a fan.
has been scary for you.
Yeah, no.
But it seems like that was not necessarily, it wasn't a necessary part of your experience. Once we started getting into it, it's more of a generalized anxiety that it's actually valuable maybe to work through that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Of it, as I had started to do things like rock climbing and other movement practices, those felt safe enough where I could do a dyno to catch something. I, even with swing dancing, having a partner who could lift me up and swing me around and stuff like that, those felt safe. And I started to realize, oh, maybe I am okay with flying through the air. I've been working on laches at the Ninja Gym, and again, like, that took a lot of mental breakthrough, I guess, of letting go of the bar and catching again. And so I think having those practices and being able to kind of break that barrier for me made it possible to say, okay, maybe I'm ready to revisit the Kong and fly through the air, even though it's scary.
So I think that's fascinating, because we can have these stories about ourselves. Like, I'm just a person who doesn't like to fly through the air. And sometimes there's a reason that's really valuable to investigate within that can help open things up in a broader way. And then it's like, well, this thing that was scary is actually really fun and exciting.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to come at it from different angles, which again goes back to like, okay, what kind of play is motivating to you? So I felt more comfortable flying through the air in a dance setting versus a lache, or if gym setting.
Yeah, I had a really fascinating experience like that. I think I'm sure I've told you about this, but I was teaching at the ancestral uh, movement retreat with Simon Thacker in Australia, and I can't remember exactly why, but he ended up sort of doing a lot of the basic parkour stuff on the little obstacle course they had. They built this really cool obstacle course in the woods out of driftwood and ropes and trees,
Cool.
and and so he taught some of the like basic vaults and basic things, and I was not quite sure how to get started with this group in taking them into my world, and I had just this weird idea to just put some music on and like do like a dance party and then let it turn into an obstacle course thing, and it tapped into some kind of group flow with this group that was really remarkable. And I had a bunch of the women who came come up to me afterwards and tell me that they had been really afraid to try parkour. But when it was framed as dance, all of a sudden the basic vaulting movements weren't scary. They became really fun because they were expressive.
Ah, yeah.
And so yeah, I'm curious to hear, just your response about how you've experienced the different frames of what the practices that I've done look like, and you're bumping into them, and they don't always work for you.
Yeah, I think, and that goes back to my fear of flying. I think a lot of the stuff that you, to some extent, but then other people who you train with, or I have seen in the Washington parkour space, they're all about flying. A lot of the time it's jumping from height. Gasworks Park was a huge place where people would practice for a long time. And yeah, I mean, I would take a lot of photos of you guys doing it, and somehow I ran across a few older photos recently, and my God, that is high. Like jumping from some of those, the
pillars,
the water tower jump, like holy moly, those things are huge. And they were like 12, 14 feet across. Maybe, I don't know.
7 feet.
7 feet. Okay, it felt big though. Like it felt
Big
really
enough.
big enough, and certainly high enough that I was not interested. So
I guess there was a 14-foot jump, which is like 3 feet off the ground.
Okay.
And then there's a 7-foot jump, which is like 20 feet off the ground.
okay, it was in any case they were big and scary and not interesting. And so yeah, if that is how it is framed to me, no thank you at all. Whereas yeah, I've had that experience as well where you've turned music on at one of your classes and things like that, and for the most part it has helped. I don't know, me personally, I don't know how much it's helped me, but I've definitely seen it help other people. It helps them kind of literally and metaphorically kind of shake off the cobwebs, just kind of get into their bodies. And I think that's a huge power of dance and rhythm. There's something very primal in us as humans that we want to move to a rhythm. We do want to join in with a rhythm, and I think that helps people tap into their bodies, helps tap into movement, and can make it seem more make them themselves feel more capable of, oh, well, if I'm already moving, it's not that hard to just kick over onto this thing, whatever that thing is.
Yeah. When you're moving to the music in some sense can drive your movement.
Yeah.
And that can help, I think, escape some of the mental noise
Very much.
that limits people. That was the other thought that I had when we were talking about your experience of learning the Kong vault is a really great book that I highly recommend everyone in the audience is called The Inner Game of Tennis. And I don't think you've read that one.
I haven't, no.
But I think it'd be really useful for you now as I'm sitting here talking about it. But he talks about how, the classic thing as a tennis instructor, someone comes to you and says, I need to work on my backhand or something like that. And so then you'll watch them do something, or they'll tell you, hey, this is the problem with my backhand. And a lot of times, the problem they think is the problem isn't even the problem. But you can identify, oh, you're too early, or you're too late, or the racket's turned the wrong way, or not hitting it squarely, or whatever it is. And what he noticed was that very often the more words he gave someone about what they were doing wrong in the process, the more they would actually perform poorly. And the more that he took away the things that they were thinking about and gave them something very simple to focus on,
Yeah.
they would perform well. And so just thinking about you and some of the things I know about your own kind of internal world, it strikes me that, you know, when you're trying a parkour, or when you're trying to do a Kong vault, right? If you have a perception that it's something you should be able to do, or you've done it in the past, when you come back to it, it's a really easy place for the self-critical part of you
Yes.
to arise.
Oh gosh, I am the worst at that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've watched that frustration cycle with you multiple times where you've come into parkour, you know, you're actually a very physically talented person. You're super strong, right? Like I always tell the story about you that you, I think, got your deadlift up to like 250 pounds with like 3 months of training
Something like that. Yeah.
at a body weight of 130 pounds at the time.
Yeah.
You know, which is a lot.
Yeah.
Which is a lot for, you know,
Yeah.
you know. So you have a lot of inherent strength, you know. You just got your dead hang pull up again. Last year you were doing like 5.
I'd gotten up to 5 last year. Yeah.
Which again, for a woman who's had babies and dealt with diastasis and everything, is pretty impressive. And you're not training full time as an athlete.
No, it's not my full-time thing.
You're working. So I always perceived you, and like if you go back to the very earliest videos of us moving around, like your ability to link movement patterns together and to have good cadence between them was superior to mine in the beginning. You were less klutzy looking. So you couldn't jump as far as me because your body's just not as big as mine.
Yeah.
Right? And you probably don't have the same kind of natural springiness that I seem to have. But you have a lot of base physical ability. But you weren't quite as dedicated as I was.
Right.
And so you'd kind of come in, do a little bit, do pretty well, and then get busy doing other things. And then when you came back, I would see you get really frustrated really quickly
Yeah.
by the inability to complete challenges.
Yeah.
And I wonder about that sense of how the practice itself reveals this underlying mental world, but then also how we as a culture, like the way that I coached when I was 22, 23, or so, I guess 24, 25, 26, 27, you know, it really fed the things that made the practice uncomfortable and difficult for you.
Yeah, I want to dig more into that part as well, but I think what got me thinking was your observation about when I return to a practice and feeling frustrated, because I see that a lot with all of my friends, frankly, right now, especially as we are getting older. We're not 24, 25 anymore. There are so many people who are coming back into movement after, having a desk job, having kids, that sort of thing, and getting really frustrated that they're not where they were. I mean, it's that same phenomenon that I was talking about earlier of if I take even a month off of running and try to get back into it and I'm not where I was, I get really frustrated and I beat myself up, and part of me doesn't even want to do it anymore. Thankfully, unthankfully, whatever, I've gone through that cycle enough now that I know that that's going to happen, and I'm able to kind of catch myself or remind myself, you took a month off. You're not going to be where you are. And I do think that I wasn't able to do that when I was younger. I did expect myself to stay at that same level of performance. And so I got caught in that cycle of, I'm not as good as these guys and gals. I haven't been doing this in a while. It's not worth it to me. And that was part of it too. I wasn't as motivated as a lot of the people were to go out and train in 30-degree rain in the winter. That was also not as motivating for me.
Nice thing about the Ninja Gym.
Yeah, another nice thing about the Ninja Gym.
Yeah. So, it's been remarkable to see just, how you've grown into being able to benefit in some sense from parkour as a practice, maybe.
Yeah.
And I think that for you, it just wasn't there in the beginning because it too easily tapped into some of those difficult mental places for you. And I think that you kind of like needed to do a lot of therapy before you were ready to do parkour. I hope that doesn't sound unfair.
No, I mean, I think it goes back to what kind of play was the most comfortable for me, what was the most motivating for me. We also started doing martial arts. I guess not until when did we start doing Muay Thai?
We started doing Muay Thai pretty early, like 2006.
Okay, and that to me has stayed very motivating. Like I often think about getting back into Muay Thai, or even just cardio kickboxing class, or even frankly when we go to the ninja gym. Sometimes they have a big bag in the corner there, and I'll find myself just kind of kicking it because I'm trying to warm up or that sort of thing. So I think a lot of it is what motivates you, what inspires you to move, what feels good in your body. And so for me with parkour, a lot of the stuff that I saw was flying through the air, and that didn't feel safe, that didn't feel comfortable. So yeah, I had to find other ways to get comfortable with flying through the air. I couldn't just keep doing cats over and over until I felt good enough. I had to find other ways to get comfortable flying through the air. And I think there was also, frankly, a perception around certain skills were deemed cooler or more important or that sort of thing. And I think honestly a lot of like bar flow, for example, was like a nice to have. It wasn't considered as prestigious. That's the word I'm trying to think of. And I think that has changed, but at the time that was also a little bit of a barrier of if I wanted to do bar flow, for example, that was not that, I don't know, that just wasn't seen as cool or as prestigious. And so there was also a little bit of stigma around that, I think. At least that was my feeling at the time.
Yeah, no, I think so. It's an interesting thing to think about because we were just watching that video Gate Crashers, which is a 40-minute, really high quality parkour video featuring only women for anyone who wants to watch it. And I think Rachel Gao is one of the athletes, if I'm remembering her name correctly. And she does a lot of sort of bridge rotation skills on walls and rails. And involves like sort of acrobatic kicks and opening up the hips and showing some of her flexibility. And I was remembering actually back to the women's jams and like you and Janine and Brandy in the beginning of the parkour community exploring some of these sort of soft acrobatic elements with the ground and rails. And having a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah.
And I remember that like a lot of the male parkour community was like, oh, that's girl parkour. It's kind of lame.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't require the same sort of power.
Right.
Or courage, right? The same physical courage of like, I'm going to fly through the air. Yeah. Another thing is that a lot of the same men can't do the splits, right?
They couldn't fit through the bars.
Right. And so it's not... a lot of the women who came into parkour who really liked it also came from a gymnastics background. So they would come in and they'd have like really high advanced mobility. Yeah. But they wouldn't have the same courage to just run really fast at a wall and jump really far.
I mean, they would have bar to bar skills, so that sense of flying through the air, they would often. But yeah, I agree that there was not that sense of like, I'm just going to literally throw myself at a wall and hope I catch it.
Yeah, and maybe not.
And maybe not, yeah.
Now they don't even catch it, right? I don't know if you saw the or the other big video is Capstone Oath. Right? Where
yes.
There's like a 23-foot running just splat to a tree and slides down it from a rooftop. So,
it's not a good plan. I don't think it's a good plan. That does not look fun to me. No, at all.
Yeah, as a 42-year-old man, I'm also not in the splat and slide crowd anymore.
No.
But yeah, I think what's coming up for me is just we've been having a conversation for a little while about an article that we want to co-write about how we bring play back.
Yes.
How do we bring play back? And there is just, incredibly growing sort of research on the damage that's been done to children through the loss of unstructured play.
Yeah.
We've lost unstructured play because of our safetyism culture. We don't let kids out on the street. They're restricted from using public areas. They'll get moved on because kids have been shuffled into all sorts of super structured extracurricular activities. And now because of the rise of screens, where kids, even if they have time and people would allow them to go outside, there's always the siren call of Call of Duty or Twitter or
Minecraft,
Instagram or TikTok, right?
Yeah.
And so people like Jonathan Haidt and Jean Twenge and other people have been really saying, like, you know, this is very bad. And we now have like immense amounts of information on the level of anxiety and the kind of failure to launch in young people that we've never seen before, where they're not dating, they're not starting to have sex, they're not moving out of their houses, they're not...
No, and this has been sort of known for, I would say, probably 20 years. Honestly, there was evidence of this back in when I was writing my thesis. So even before that, of children who did not play with Legos, who didn't go out and play, climb trees, that sort of thing. There was actually statistically significant differences in abilities to do engineering or problem solving or those kinds of capabilities, and those were showing up 20 years ago.
Yeah, Stuart Brown talks about that in his book Play, that I think it was in the 90s. They were doing research on NASA engineers.
Right, yeah.
And the NASA engineers, basically, they suddenly started finding that the new recruits were not able to solve the same type of problems as previous recruits, despite having all the same academic qualifications.
Right.
But some of them could. So they started to study which group could and which group couldn't, and they found that the group that couldn't were kids who had only had academic backgrounds. They didn't actually do the play. Like kids who want to become engineers play with engineering stuff.
Yeah.
Like we have our family friends, the Gowings, their
Yeah.
son Trey, since he was 4 years old.
Oh, yeah.
Has loved to take things apart, and now
Right.
he's 11 and he can build his own go-kart, so
He broke a lamp and his mom made him put it back together, kind of thing,
Yeah.
or have to buy a new one, and so he actually built her a new lamp, which I
Yeah.
thought was so sweet. Right? He can do that now.
yeah, we could use some training like that for our kids to
Yeah.
be able to rebuild some of the stuff they break.
That's true.
It's like, okay, Katie, you got to cast me a new a new dragon.
I know.
Our daughter, our youngest daughter, she's got her hands on everything.
Yes.
So, what's coming up for me in that conversation around? So, again, one other thing from Stuart Brown's research.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's such a crazy thing, and I think it's insane that this is not a conversation, right? We're talking about how important play is. We in the United States of America have a problem with spree killers, with people who go out and kill large amount of school shooters.
Yeah.
And we have this huge debate. Is it because of drugs? Is it because of guns? Is it because of anything else? And it becomes this huge ideological thing. But Stuart Brown research showed that the most important common factor among all these spree killers was that they were never allowed to play as children.
Yeah.
And somehow, nobody talks about that.
Right.
Nobody is saying, since this is a problem, we need to extend recesses.
Yeah.
Right? We need to make spaces more open to play. Like, if
Right.
you want to decrease the amount of school shooters, maybe you should allow more skateboarding
Right.
in public spaces.
Whereas instead, at least where we live here in the Pacific Northwest, school districts have shortened recess or even got rid of unstructured play in some school districts. I think I'm thinking specifically of somewhere in the Seattle area.
Mercer Island. That was-
Yeah. Thankfully, the parents protested and they got unstructured play back.
Yeah.
But it's becoming more of a trend, and I think it does speak a lot to what you were saying as well about all of the structured sports and things like that. It doesn't allow that problem solving that is so crucial for human development. I mean, forget NASA engineers, just how do you grow up to be a successful adults. You need to know how to problem solve. You need to know how to settle arguments about the rules without,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
just how to negotiate, how to get creative, how to play, how to, if you get your ball stuck in the tree, how do you get it down? All those things that kind of come with unstructured play, that we're not allowing children to do anymore.
Yeah, we're literally medicating children to prevent them from playing,
Yeah.
right? Because one thing that Ritalin and Adderall do is they basically decrease play drive to allow you to focus more.
Right.
But then, of course, those kids are not actually doing the play that they need to do when they're being given these amphetamine class drugs. And then on the other side, we're giving them anti-anxiety medications and anti-depression medications because they're actually not able to go meet fundamental needs for socialization, for connection, for touch through play because they don't know how.
Yeah.
And they've never, and it's not as available, right? Like that's the thing that we're really running into as parents right now is we can have these values as a family, but if every other kid in the cul-de-sac in the neighborhood is on a screen, we can send our kids outside, but there's no other kids outside.
Right.
I saw someone said that the smartphone cured boredom. And I was like, yeah, and it killed childhood.
Yeah, we need boredom.
Yeah.
I mean, there's strong evidence around the need for boredom, both as a child and as an adult. You need that space to process what you've learned, to just think about, issues in the world and to come up with solutions for those. You need downtime. That's a huge struggle that even in corporate America, where I've been working, as a researcher, I have to advocate for downtime. I have to advocate for, no, I literally need to block out this 2-hour chunk so I have time to literally think.
Yep.
To not do anything else, just think.
I'm the same, right? I'm
Yeah.
in an entrepreneurial role. I have a large enough following now that there's kind of always people who want to talk to me.
Oh, sure.
There's always things that need to be done.
And
in
we've
the
got
brand.
kids and
We've
chores
got kids
and
so
all
it's
kinds of stuff, yeah.
I have days where I'm on 5 Zoom calls.
Yeah.
Right. And then I'm just exhausted. And then there's, like then I want to do my movement practice, and then I need to spend some time with you, and I need to spend some time with the kids. And it's like there's no dead space in my day at all.
Yeah.
And then without any dead space, there's no space for it. It's like the moment I get some downtime, I just fall asleep.
Yeah. Or
Not always, but
but again, it's so easy to fall back onto your phone.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I abuse
and we
my
both
phone
do
too.
that.
Yeah.
For sure. And so I think it's important to remember how do we break that, because it's scary to also, as a kid or as an adult, to go talk to somebody in real life too, to literally walk over.
That's so strange to me. Like our kids are really afraid of walking over and knocking on a friend's door to see if they're available for play.
I think because you get immediate rejection, whereas if you have a text or that sort of thing, there's like.
It's like the culture has changed, because when we were kids, that was normal.
There wasn't another option.
Yeah, and you didn't there was nothing to do, right? We didn't have Netflix, right? Like there's one TV show.
Right.
It's like at 4:00, it's
And that was it. Yeah.
Nothing's going on, so you just went to a friend's house.
Right.
And so by giving kids so many options, in a weird way, we've made it harder for them to do some things that are a little bit hard, that are really, really fundamental, which is like go ask someone to go play with you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, because we have this safetyism culture, even if they do ask a kid to go play, they're not going to be able to go play in the woods because their parents aren't going to let them go play in the woods.
Yeah.
Or maybe not even allowed to go inside other people's houses, so they just can only play right outside the house in the street. The safetyism culture has been really punishing. So what I wanted to go to, though, was what we've been talking about in that conversation is that with what Jonathan Haidt and Nicholas Christakis and Jean Twenge are talking about, as far as I can tell, it's really about what we've done wrong and a lot less about how we could effectively rebuild it.
Solutioning, yeah.
And I think the conversation really needs to move to, this is a huge problem.
Yeah.
and it's a problem. Like we understand. I think most people intuitively understand that lack of play is a problem for children. But I actually think it's a lack of play is a huge part of the obesity crisis and the mental health crisis.
Oh, it's a
and
huge
number of
part for
crises.
adults too, and
Yeah.
that's been a huge talking point of mine since I've done, I mean, my master's thesis, just really understanding how important play is for humans of all ages. And that, I agree, I think has been, it's slowly starting to come back into the conversation of that adults need play. We can't just, not to diss on CrossFit, but like you can't just go do CrossFit and that's going to, you know, make you a healthier, happier human being. I mean, unless that's your mode of play.
It's better than a lot of what's out there, right?
That's true.
Like we
Yeah,
can
yeah,
diss
yeah.
on CrossFit as much as we,
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot of things that you might say aren't ideal about CrossFit, but CrossFit gets people moving
Sure.
with a group of other people,
That's
so they have
true.
social connection.
That's a good point.
And they're doing competition,
Yeah, that's, yeah.
which means that not everyone likes competition, but competition is an inherent playful aspect.
It is.
And so just having somewhere where you can go compete in a game every day,
Yeah, that's a good point.
and that game is scaled to your ability level.
Yeah.
So the cool thing about CrossFit is like if you play pickup basketball, and you just can't find a pickup court where like people have a comparable skill level, like maybe you're a 65-year-old guy, it's like you don't really want to go play with 25-year-olds who are going to dunk on your head.
Yeah.
But maybe there's just not a bunch of 65-year-old men who want to play pickup.
Right.
And the cool thing about CrossFit is that they will scale it, and you can do it right next to the fire breathing.
That's a good point.
25-year-old.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm usually someone who bashes CrossFit, but I'm defending it in this point because of how it captures important dynamics of play that need to be more widely available, and it worked, right? On
Yeah,
a really
yeah.
tremendous level. So many people had a much wider access to some kind of movement because of what CrossFit popularized.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that you bring up a really good point that it started to introduce the idea of games again to adults, and I think it actually, I think you bring up a really good point that it started to reintroduce the idea of, hey, your workout can be fun, right? It can be fun. I mean, I think honestly it's one reason why pickleball actually became more popular, because it's like it's a game and it's okay to just go and have fun. You're still going to get a workout. So yeah, I agree. I'm sorry to diss on CrossFit, but
Well, you did CrossFit for a while too.
I did for a little bit. I actually ran into some mean girls, so I think that was part of it for me, is that I actually did not have as great an experience with it as other people have, but I've seen it work really well for people. So,
But that kind of gets to the point that I was trying to make, which is that we can say we need play,
yeah,
and we can look at something like CrossFit and say it's successful in part because it captured like fundamental dynamics of human motivation that the classic gym model didn't have.
right,
When you go into your regular gym and there's just a circuit of machines and free
Yeah.
weights and you got to do it on your own, it's far less motivating than show up at
7 o'clock,
at
yeah,
this time,
Yep.
and the regular group of people who work out are
Yeah.
going to be there together. You're going to suffer together.
yeah,
You're gonna clap and give each other a hug and say good job, and
yeah,
and you get that social validation, which is such an important thing for people. So this is what I'm pointing to, is that there has to be these underlying understanding of how much a culture of play
yes,
is actually a very sophisticated thing, and it can evolve organically over time, right? Like there's a pelada, I think is what it's called, is the Brazilian street soccer. But there's a very distinct culture around Brazilian street soccer and how it's played, and it's incredibly productive, and it produces the best soccer players in the world.
yeah,
And it's not structured. It's not the academies that they have in Germany,
Yeah.
right, in the United States, but produces the best players in the world. And that can evolve organically. But right now, it's like we have to start to understand those things at a very basic level, because we have, I think maybe a good analogy is that we took an ecology of play that kid has had available to them, and we destroyed the whole thing. We burned the forest down. And yeah, you can let it grow back, but it's hard to let it grow back when people are actively throwing trash and like there's so much friction in our culture that the basic things of play face.
Yeah.
So it's like we got to do an active replanting process, an active protection process of
Yeah.
play.
And I think one way of doing that is to reintroduce adults to play. Because
Yes.
if they can see the value of semi-structured, unstructured play in the sense of parkour, then they're going to say, oh, well, if this is good for me, then it's also good. I can see why it would be important to my kids as well.
Yeah. That's thanks for the plug, honey. That's what we do with involvement play. Yeah, so I'm really interested in this aspect of it, and I'm interested in talking to you about it. One, because you love researching play and all these things, but also because you've had the experience of the culture of movement that I'm generating or that I'm part of being something that can feel not welcoming to you, and then something that's becoming welcoming to you. And there's really important things that have changed, like something like the theatrical element, right? Like at our retreats, we do parkour in the woods, or we roughhouse and do martial arts skills. So we do a lot of these just movement-based skills. But one thing that's proven really, really popular is that we have a night at the end of the retreat where we ask the students to tell a story of their experience of the retreat.
Right.
And we ask them to do it in a ridiculous theatrical way. And it bonds people in such an intense way. It ignites the imaginal aspect of them. And our kids, of course, get to come and watch, and they absolutely delight in it. And those subtle little things of inviting in different ways of playing, different play personalities, I think have made the culture of play that we've built with Evolving with Play much more inviting to someone who's not a 6'2" man who inherently has the temperament to throw themselves at a wall running 15 miles an hour, fly 15 feet through the air, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, tell me about how you've seen that sense of how it's shifted for you over time, of how welcome you feel in that space, or how much you want to participate in, and what kind of how it works with the internal emotional stuff that you've been growing and working within yourself.
Yeah, I think it's hard to go back and try to remember how, because it has evolved quite a bit in the however many years you've been doing it. 12 almost?
We start with 11 years for Evolving Play, and then the previous 7 or whatever for 8 for parkour.
Yeah. Because the experience itself has also evolved, where it started off as just, like a weekend gathering of very elite athletes, throwing themselves at trees and things instead of walls. But I think, it has changed into more of a, I think, I don't want to say it's evolved into, what you observed and what the coaches observed was that sense of community that was coming out of it. And so I would say that all of you have actively cultivated that community. Yeah. And in doing so, have introduced other elements like storytelling, like some of the games that involve narrative play, or taking on perspectival, like what would it be like to be a bird or a weasel, or that sort of thing. And that has proven to be really powerful, because it also helps create empathy for other people in the group. And that's something that is pretty well documented in play studies, of if you can, take on that perspective of what is it like to be a butterfly or that sort of thing, you then have more empathy for that experience. And so I think that also has helped cultivate community, and has helped welcome people who might not be as comfortable with certain elements of whatever you're doing, because the retreats themselves and the EMP method has so many different skill sets and elements and things like that. There are now dance elements, and it was parkour based, and then martial arts, but you even introduced dance and narrative play and things like that too. So I think it has allowed more people to become involved, which then welcomes not just more people, including myself, who is not a 6'2" full-time athlete type person. It has also invited pieces of a 6'2" athlete to come out, which I have found so beautiful to watch. People who might have been afraid to share that they can sing have come around, and so around the campfire, like, people will share pieces of their day or that sort of thing, and you've actually started inviting people to bring instruments and things like that, because organically people would start sharing those around the campfire, or just as we were hiking through the woods or that sort of thing, somebody would start singing a song. And that's also part of play, right? That's also part of community building. That's also part of the full experience of being in a community and experiencing the world. And so I think that has helped welcome more of the individual as well. It's not just, oh, I'm going to show up and be strong and brave and push myself to the limit. It's also, I'm going to allow myself to be vulnerable. I'm going to allow myself to share this piece of myself that I might not have been willing to share before. And by allowing those pieces to come out, I think it has therefore invited a wider variety of people, including myself, to feel like, oh, maybe I do belong in this community. It's not just super powered athletes who are, trying to show off their tree climbing skills. It can be someone like me who, I'm going to climb the tree, but I'm not going to, do it in record time. I'm going to do it in my own way. And I think that is really powerful in reclaiming play for myself, and frankly anybody else who comes to the retreat, whether they are a semi-professional athlete or somebody like me who's rediscovering play. I think it provides people the opportunity to rediscover their love of play and different modes of play that they maybe haven't explored in a long time. And I think that's been really cool to see that evolution over the last decade and change.
Thank you. It's really fun to be able to kind of have it at a point where it feels like you can feel welcomed in it.
And it's a nice feeling as well, because partially because my kids are older and I feel like I can leave them, they won't go eat dangerous berries or anything like that if I'm participating. But in full disclosure, I did sort of feel like I didn't belong for a while in that group, that I wasn't an athlete like you guys. I wasn't capable enough to keep up, and to feel like I am, not just because I've also been training more in the last couple of years. Like, when I first joined a retreat for the full retreat, I was not at my fittest at all. I had been, I had a kid 4 years prior. I was still doing I am still doing the corporate world, but I was very much in the corporate world, like living that life. And so it was almost a chance for me to rediscover my joy of movement. And I think that would not have been an option at the beginning, a few years prior. So that was very cool to feel like that has changed, and that I am welcome no matter where I'm at in my movement journey. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
And not just because I'm married to you and I get, access.
No, there's lots of people who come from the same from a similar place, right? And I think part of what has really allowed us to meet them well, and what I saw a lot in that moment of you learning the Kong is it's sort of like, it's funny, there's been such a journey around this for me, but I guess I reached my late 20s and was having all these injuries, and I started thinking, like, okay, what am I doing this for?
Yeah.
And if it matters this much to me, am I doing it in a way that I'm going to be able to do it for the rest of my life? And when I dug into that, I started getting into this idea of, like, really ultimately it's about the meaning that it gives. and somehow like what's meaningful is that at least part of what makes it meaningful is the sense that it helps us transform who we are
Yeah.
in a really valuable way. And we lean into that over years, and you realize that like the transformation that most people are really needing, or the transformations that are really meaningful to people, aren't really like if you can add 6 inches to their running broad jump, or
No.
you know, or their conk to precision. It's more like something emotional, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like your experience of the meaning of flying through the air changing.
Yeah.
That's the type of thing that really impacts for people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? One of our students, I always tell her story, is Maura. She the first year she came to work with us, she was looking at like a 5-foot, 6-foot jump across a creek bed, just a little bit upstream of a waterfall.
Yeah, it's pretty. It looks intimidating.
It's scary.
It's yeah.
But she was very physically capable of it. But it, for whatever reason, it triggered her fear of, you know, as everyone who experiences parkour will trigger their fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And for her, the expression of that fear brought up a desire to cry. And she asked me if she could cry while she did the jump. And I told her that it was okay. And so she did it. And that was really empowering. And she felt like she could then go like have difficult conversations with her boss at work better because of it. And then she, you know, a few years later, it was like the part of her that needed to cry had kind of disappeared in this. And in the last year that she came to work with us, you know, she was jumping off the highest cliff and doing backflips off a rope swing. And it was like the openness and support of the emotional processing that she had was a necessary precondition for her capacity to discover her own freedom and the fun that she could have.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I see, in some sense, potentially with you, is that it's not that flying through the air isn't fun. It's that being scared isn't fun.
Yeah.
And that there's a need for a type of support and an awareness and connection to emotion that can open up the space of these practices. And that's what I'm pointing to in thinking about, like, how do we build a culture of play that can actually welcome in a world of kids now who grew up without really getting to play and who are suffering from anxiety and depression.
Yeah, I think that welcoming key is going to be huge. I think there's a lot of, it goes back to my sense of certain parkour practices or movements had more prestige than others. I think there is already with kids the sense of, oh, well, I'm not good enough. I'm not talented enough. I'm not, you know, whatever enough in order to play a pickup game of soccer or go riding my bike around the neighborhood, even that sort of thing. And I think that is something that is a huge problem in our culture that all of us need to fight, children and adults and things like that. And so, yeah, I think creating spaces where people feel free to ask for help around play or to go get, just to go be silly, to kind of, I think is going to be really, really critical in allowing play to start taking root again. There was, I was actually thinking about something that happened to me at the first retreat. Was there's a climb up a waterfall that everybody does, and I felt so embarrassed that I needed help. But so that was also like a boundary for me that I was able to cross, was able to get over. Like, I needed help, and that was okay.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another, finding opportunities like that, whether it's at the retreats like that or whatever the case may be, you know, a pickup game of soccer, or I don't know. I think that's a great question, even, of where can we find those opportunities of going and being vulnerable, of asking for help, of saying, I haven't done this in 10 years. I don't know if I can still do it, right? Like, where are those safe places for us as adults and kids even to pick up a game that we haven't done in 10 years, to try something new that we haven't done before. I think there's a stigma around, oh, well, I'm too old to learn how to ice skate. I'm too old to learn how to whatever. And I think that's a really important stigma that we need to break. As parents, encourage our kids to do that, and even just as individuals, I think that's something we all can do, is to be very transparent about, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm going to find out. I am learning as I go. I am trying something new. Yeah.
Yeah, we just ran into this with our oldest daughter, right? She started dance when she was 18 months old.
Yeah.
She danced at least once a week, you know.
Oh yeah, she was in dance class for many years.
Was, what, 8?
Yeah, 7 or 8.
7 or 8. She did, and then she had a big performance with the Russian ballet for the Nutcracker, and then she took some time off, and then she didn't go back.
Yeah, well then the pandemic happened.
We moved, and
yeah,
we weren't able to get her back in class, and so when she was 11, she's dancing around the house, and you can see that she still has the skills, and you can see that she's motivated like that, and all of her friends like doing acrobatic dancey things.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get her back in class, and she feels so horribly embarrassed that she's going to be, she's fallen behind. And it's been a real struggle to get her to like do this thing that she loves to do.
Yeah.
Just because of the idea that it's embarrassing.
Right.
That she didn't stay in it, I guess, right? At 11, she already feels like she's too old to like start over.
And some of that's being a tween.
Yeah.
But I mean, I see that even with all of our kids. Well, not our youngest, but with Kier too, our son, I see that as well. He gets anxious about like, oh, I don't know if I'm good enough to join this game of soccer or whatever. And he's a really talented athlete. All of our kids are really talented athletes, and they feel it. And so I can't imagine a kid who maybe isn't the most talented athlete, like, what is it like for them? You know, and that I want everyone to feel like they have a right to play. Like, that is absolutely a human right, to be able to go out and play and run around and move your body and find that community and find that fun competition, and be able to just find joy in whatever it is you're doing, whether it's building a fort or playing soccer or climbing a tree. That is absolutely a human right.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting tired.
Okay.
I'm sleepy.
We can call it, yeah.
Luckily, we live in the same house, so we can pick this up another time.
Sounds good.
Thank you for joining me and sharing about your journey and your research and the things that you have to say about play. I think it's really great to have your voice. So I'll have you back on the podcast soon.
I would love to. Thank you.
Bye. And the light's getting too dappled.
Oh yeah, that's a good time to call it. Should be still recording.
I know.
Okay.
So there's a button here, but it's not popping up. Come on. Jasper, what do you mean? There it